I just think we carry on talking, to be honest. I mean, I'll
Yeah.
introduce you, but I like to keep it informal. Um, what's your name?
Hello, Tom. I'm Chris Kenworthy.
All right, Chris. How's it going?
How's it going? Yeah. How's it going? It's going. I felt really queasy and dizzy when I woke up this morning, and it's probably relevant to our conversation if we're going to talk about the inner critic today. I think I had an experience yesterday that might have stirred up some sediment, so that might be an after effect of that. It's almost like a little bit of a vulnerability hangover. Describe it like being hungover, but without I've not been drinking. A little bit
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
out of
Yeah,
sorts, maybe. Yeah, but yeah, I'm excited to talk to you, and I'm feeling more chipper now. Actually, more kind of upbeat. Actually, seeing your lovely
yeah.
face.
Oh, yeah. I do have that effect on people often, I find. Either that or it's polar opposite. It's like just
Oh.
it's like Marmite, love or hate. So
All right, well, it's love. You're getting love this morning.
that's amazing. That's the best. That's the best one. That's my favorite one. Um, no, I wanted to talk to you today because, like I was saying before, I saw your post on Instagram and you were talking about the inner critic, and I thought I've been working with clients a lot on the inner critic lately and starting to engage it and starting to try to develop an understanding because I come from like a more meditative aspect, and we can explore this a little bit later of like, well, the inner critic and more like an investigation of thought and what is thought and why do we believe it, and we're always seeing the world through the lens of thought and story and narrative structure, which is like language. And we're getting deep straight off the bat here, but this kind of
Go
like
for it.
language that structures
Mm.
consciousness in a way. And so I've been going into that deep dive and the whole idea of thought and why it has such a like a potency and impact on us in the
Mm.
first place.
Mm.
And then I saw, yeah, and so working with clients with that, and then I saw your post on the inner critic, and I thought this would be a good little maypole to dance around for
Mm.
us for a morning or so. And so I wanted to get your take on like how you experienced the inner critic and
Mm.
how it shows up for you and the ways that you find to deal with it. And I'd also, but before that, I mean, why don't you tell people a little bit about yourself and what you do and why you're so damn special?
Yeah, gladly. I'm just noticing how excited I am to have a go at all those kind of topics that you just mentioned there. It's a really rich subject. But yeah, hello. I'm Chris. I'm an improviser of comedy and drama and also a transformative coach. And I help overburdened doers relate to have a kind of a deeper, I guess, emotional experience of life and to lighten their load a little bit and to enjoy more of that which makes life worth living. I guess I would say, yeah, more joyful existence, but whilst also getting on with things. Being a kind of practical doer myself, I like to progress in life and yeah, just get on. So that's who I work with. Uh, and I would say that the inner critic, the inner judge, wow, um, big feature in my life, a big feature in my internal experience of what it's like being me.
Mm,
And sometimes I think because it's been there for so long, like, I guess that I describe the inner critic, the inner judge as a discerning voice, shall we say, one that is drawn to what could be improved or fixed or made better, or what is broken or bad or inherently wrong, things like that. It's
mm,
very drawn to that sort of stuff. And I'd say that because I've lived with it most of my life, I forget how normalized I've become to it. And for a lot of people, like
mm,
that, they have a sense of, um, a sort of inner critic, but it's so vocal. I'm so normalized to this that I forget when I talk to other people what it's like. They're like, "Wow, that sounds pretty overpowering and strong," and it is a huge feature. It's very not literally vocal, but a force that influences my actions and my choices. And when you
mm,
talk to other people who are like me, um, yeah, we just take it for granted how noisy and loud this thing is inside
Yeah,
us. Yeah.
yeah. That's it's kind of interesting. You say like not literally vocal, but I
Mm,
was reading recently that, or listening, I think it was to a podcast. I think it was Andrew Huberman who was talking about it, and he's saying that when you think a thought, there is a measurable. They're able to detect micro movements in your throat as if you're kind of vocalizing. I think it was something like that. I don't think I'm butchering it. But it's like even thinking a sound, like thinking in sound form rather than in image form. You know, you think of images and then you've got thoughts, which is like your dialogue. They're able to detect these very minuscule movements in your throat as if you're actually kind of vocalizing the thing. And that for me is interesting coming from it's like a sound perspective, because I work a lot with music and weird sounds and spin out the brain with this stuff and create these kind of quasi psychedelic type experiences with sound. And I really like get off on it. I really love
mm,
it. I just find it puts you in such a like a non-linear place where you're not consumed by this narrative that's just like running
mm,
through your brain dictating your
mm,
actions. But yeah, I noticed that a lot when and I know from my own experience where with the inner critic, where it just used to be so overbearing. It was like, God, who is this guy? You know, where's this
mm,
coming from? You know,
mm,
but I didn't quite have the awareness and just assume I was so kind of wrapped up in it and
mm,
almost like it has its own momentum.
mm.
Um, it's
Hasn't
difficult.
everyone got this? Isn't it like this for everyone? Like you just assume because that's the way it is.
Yeah, right. And it's so you just feel so strong, and it's like it spins you up. It almost has like a gravity that kind of sucks you in, and
Hmm.
it's very difficult to disengage with it. But you hear it, but you do somehow still feel like it's attacking you. So there is like two of you in a way. Um, so yeah, let's, this is an expression that I love that you use. It's like, we'll take this idea for a walk and see where we end up with it. But how do you find yourself? So the inner critic for you kind of shows up as this, you say like discerning voice. For some people, it's more like an outright abusive voice, just chastising them 24/7 for every move they make, like no matter whether it's, you know, hypothetically right or wrong. It's like it doesn't really matter. It's like, there always should have been more. You should have done this
Mm,
differently. Whatever you do, it's like you should have done it better or different
mm,
or something like that. And thinking about that, I just think about the kind of the I want to go down to like the texture of the voice is what I'm
mm,
always kind of directing people to, is like, what if it's a thought, it has a tone and a texture and a feeling,
mm,
and if you follow it down, it's like you get, that's where the source is and that's where the meat is. But
mm.
um how do you find, how do you deal with it in yourself? Like what of your ways that you've come up with to kind of work with it?
Oh goodness. Myriad, I've tried myriad different ways to work with that. I'm in an interesting place right now with it. I do the one that really helps me is to is parts work, as we call it, internal
Yeah,
family
yeah,
systems. I
yeah.
did some work with that, and it's almost to, and this appeals to me as an improviser, is to engage with this character in a sort of dialogue way. And you talk about texture,
Mm,
and it's almost, it characterizes it. So I place it in the body. And there's multiple parts within us, and one of them is the inner critic, or the judge. And to place it somewhere in the body, usually a point of tension, or it'll be in the belly, or sometimes it's in the throat, or often it's in the head. It's really hot and it's at the front of my head. I'll place it there, and that
mm,
anchors it. And to give it texture would be to characterize it, personalize it, maybe give it an age,
mm,
um, a size and a shape, or a posture, um, where it sits around me or in me, like in physical space. And then to sort of have a kind of, yeah, it's like a dialogue. And again, it's not, we talk about vocal, and I loved what you were saying about how it manifests in different ways. It's not literally a voice. It's a feeling. It's a feeling, a sensation, or a presence, or what else can be? It can be in the muscles, a tension in the body somewhere. That's all part of the character. How I feel it there. Um, it can impact the way I speak and my behavior. It manifests in that way too. If it's running the show and it's got the best of me, it can affect my behavior. But yeah, back to the parts work stuff. So I'll gently kind of meet it where it's at and say, "Oh, hello, old friend, you again," type thing. And I might think those words, but it's more of a feeling of those words. Like I bring a sort of sense of welcome and concern, like almost parental, like care, like a kid that's, needing attention in the corner. You approach it gingerly and with love and, in an open kind of body language. And that intention kind of affects the thoughts and the emotions that exchange between us in this part. So you ask it, what's going on and how are you today? And it will come back with feedback. It will let me know it's frustrated about something usually, or
Mhm.
it's disgusted by something, or it's really often very strong words, strong feelings. And then as I get, there's a to and a fro, so I'll receive that and then come back with it and go, that's okay, that they're strong. I can see why you'd feel that. That's okay.
Mm.
And what is it you want me to know? So like, what's the thing behind, what's the need, or what's the insight behind this feeling? And this all happens rather quick. It's that as I've been doing it more and more, it gets more of it's quicker and words don't feature. It's just this kind of
Yeah, yeah,
flow of back and forth between something inside me and my kind of conscious awareness, my kind of self behind it all. And we'll go into this sort of exchange, and if there is any insight, we'll kind of be thankful for it. And then it's like, how am I in relation to you today? How do I feel about you? Or that will come into it. And then we'll just move into a process of soothing. It's okay to feel like that. And I see why you want that for me, and that's okay. And I appreciate what you're trying to do. And I just want you to know that, I appreciate this. And I just want you to know that I'm here for you and I'm here
mm.
with you, and you're not alone, because that's generally what's happening is most of these parts are just scared, frightened children
Yeah,
who want, yeah. So you soothe them, and that then has a latent effect in the day afterwards. Like that part feels seen and heard and understood and valued, basically connected with. And
yeah,
then it gives me respite because it's kicking and screaming. It wants my attention. It gets it. It gets soothed, and we move on into my life until the next time it flips out and loses its
yeah.
mind over nothing at all. You know. So that's the roundabout way I'm working with right now. But I've tried other techniques, and I'm
Mm.
happy to share them. But yeah, was that helpful?
Yeah, that's actually it's quite interesting because that's more or less the way that I've found to deal with it as well. It's like there's some
Mm.
sense of assuming positive intent. It's like I know that there is, that whatever this thing is, it's seeking expression, and I find like NVC a great way to open up a dialogue. You studied
Yeah,
NVC, nonviolent, yeah.
yeah.
Um, a great way to open up a dialogue between parts. So it's like layering NVC on top of parts work. So you have this thing that's kind of yelling and screaming like a very articulate child throwing a tantrum that wants to, that knows exactly the points to press to like get your attention. It's like, okay, I know that there's something inside of me that wants attention. Um, excuse me. From an NVC perspective, it's like there's life inside of me seeking expression, and I want to be in service to that. So you mentioned
Mm.
being a parent as well, like being a good parent and reparenting these
Mm.
parts. It's like the patience of a parent. All right, not taking it personally that this thing is, expressing itself in this way, and it's trying to push your buttons because it's trying to get your attention because it wants to alert you to some kind of
Mm.
danger, whether that's perceived from when you were 5 years old that hasn't been kind of reconciled with or integrated, or whether it's like whether it fits the facts of the present moment. And yeah, so I found that when that, it doesn't usually come up as much for me anymore, because I find, like you're saying, once you kind of build the language around it, that then creates these kind of energetic movements, this back and forth flow that you describe, that just tends to take on its own thing, and it starts to become like a new path in your brain that you just follow naturally. But yeah, if it does come up, it's like, it sounds like I can hear that you're having some very strong feelings about something. All right, so let's unpack. Let's see, because it seems like a lot of the tension is created in like the opposition and the polarity of it. It's like, here's this thing that's having a feeling, and here's me distancing myself from it, trying to get away from it, not like trying to push it away, trying to move in the opposite direction. But when I'm kind of turning towards, that's when I'm actually moving into a more of a unified place. It's like, do I have the regulatory capacity to sit with my own feelings about it having its feelings? Separating out into two is good. It's like, okay, you're having some feelings, well, I'm having some feelings about the way that you're talking to me and the way that you're approaching this, and then you have this kind of NVC style discussion about, when you speak to me like that, I feel like frustrated. It's like, 'cause I have these needs, and there's like, every part of you has some kind of positive intent. Like, you're assuming that, and then you're assuming that you're going to try to find what that positive intent is, by searching for it. And I find that can be really, really reconciliatory. And then it doesn't tend to spin out as much, because it knows that connection is actually available with it. Right, is that making sense? Like
I'm really curious about yeah, it sounds like you're using NVC. There is a kind of a challenge to it. When you do this, I feel this, and then there's the whole request part, and I prefer it if, or would you be willing to, like, I've not tried that actually, going into requesting it to do something different. I know I've kind of tried maybe giving it a different job, but that's more of an assigned thing. And so that works for you then? Does it kind of calling it out in a really gentle, empathetic way? That works.
Yeah, it does. And like, at the beginning, it was more, because you have to get, it's like whatever part you're identified with. And I know this is like an IFS concept, that you keep going, like pulling yourself back from each part until you actually get to experience yourself as the kind of the sea that all of these parts are swimming in. And so when this thing's coming at you with its like ferocity, trying to poke your shame buttons and elicit this feeling of shame, which is kind of like a manipulation. Where was it? We were discussing shame the other week. Was it Soul Cafe? I think it was Soul Cafe.
Yeah, possibly. Yeah.
Oh no, it was Kieran's thing, the Enneagram Cafe, and
okay,
we're talking about shame, and how shame is this feeling. Even the shame has a positive intent, because the shame is like, I'll make myself as small and as non-threatening as possible in order to and just like open my boundaries so that people can just take what they want, so that they see that I'm not a threat, so that they'll let me back into the group. And so in that way, it's kind of in service of ensuring you have your security survival in place by being connected to the group.
Yeah.
And I think that for me is like a conceptual understanding of shame has helped me to soothe with that a lot as well, because obviously it feels like, you've got this expansive feeling of the terror of, I'm so bad that I'm going to be ostracized, which is worse than death, coupled with, I need to make myself as small and as non-threatening as possible to make sure I'm accepted back in the group. So you've got these two opposing forces. One's got its foot on the gas, expanding outwards. The other's got its foot on the brake, kind of shrinking inwards.
Yes.
I think that's for me. That's why I experience it as so like draining. It's like
Mm.
so small and just crunching and crunching up.
Yeah.
Um, but yeah, seeing when the inner critic comes along and it wants to poke that button,
Mm.
that shame button,
Mm.
because it wants energy. Like it's kind of berating you so that you can give it energy.
Mm.
You'll feel ashamed, and then when you're feeling ashamed, you'll open up your boundaries and just give it energy. So you can kind of go
Okay.
straight into that and say, well, I'm willing to give you energy rather than I'm going to resist you. I'm willing
Mm.
to actually give you energy or what it is that you
Mm.
need. I'm willing to find out what it is that you need. And I think NVC is a great framework for doing that with. But initially, like when it's coming on quite strongly, I know for myself, I've had to like draw quite firm boundaries with it. It's like, hey,
Mm. Mm.
it's not okay to talk to me like that.
Mm.
I hear that you're suffering and frustrated and having a hard time, but that's not how we do things around here.
Mm. Mm.
And then when it kind of learns that, oh right, this is a hard no. This is not like
Mm.
a soft no. But if I keep being a dick, then I'm gonna be able to find my
Mm.
way in. It's like no,
Mm.
no, this is not what we do here. And
Mm.
that feels like the end of the spectrum of parenting. That
Yeah.
is like it's firm, but it's understanding, but it's like quite firm and solid, and it's like
Yeah.
a fiery no, like no, this
Yeah.
isn't okay. And then from there, it's like once you start to build that rapport and that bridge
Mm.
through the like the parts work NVC slash
Mm.
NVC thing, that relationship does get better, and you start to actually understand, and you can hear what's beneath the language. You know, the like we're saying, the feeling, the need, the texture. Like what do you need? Do you feel
Mm.
alone? Are you feeling disconnected?
Yeah.
And how can I help you to do that? Um, but yeah, I guess what I'm kind of circling on there is this idea of it's not like a cold hard fuck off to the inner critic, but it is like a clear
Mm.
boundary, and you
Mm.
start to set that with the inner critic. Say it's not okay to talk to me like that,
Mm.
but then you also have like the softness and the understanding as
Mhm.
well as something to cultivate.
Mm.
Is that kind of
Yeah.
does that
Yeah,
make sense?
yeah. Yeah, I'm just not. I feel inspired to go into the emphasis on the re-parenting. I do a lot of
Yeah.
parenting, well, increasingly more parenting, but I haven't really done quite so much of the re-parenting yet.
Mm,
So I'm inspired to try that at some point. I think my experience of the inner critic and in its strongest form, the inner judge, it's such a
mm,
force that I think that would be a challenge. Well, it's so integral in there. It's so embedded that I haven't been. I want to say brave enough, but it's not a case of bravery. It's more like
capacity or something.
I'm deepening my relationship with it,
Mm,
learning its myriad size, shapes, and forms. And I feel like maybe once I've got the measure of it deeper, I've always just taken it for granted and either just had this kind of ignore it or oh God, not this again type relationship for so many years. And only through this parts work am I finding more about its nuances and stuff like know thy
yeah,
enemy type thing. Although it's not my enemy, like you say, it does have positive intent and it does have a good message. It does have good messages in there for me. But yeah, my experience of it is when it's in judge mode, it is so consuming and powerful and compelling, and its message is
right.
so it's such a um I relate more to the world through my body, and I describe it as such a powerful away movement from the things that the judge judges as, bad or wrong or not for me or whatever you want to say that there's such a
Yeah,
energetic push away from that. And it can cause so much. I mean, I had an experience not that long ago where I was just torn between these two very powerful forces within me, and parts went out the window. I just
yeah,
it just wasn't resourced enough to be able to sit there and have that compassionate dialogue because it was so consuming. This kind of this rage, this anger, this overwhelming indignation that my inner judge has. And on the one hand was this is what the Instagram post was about, I think, that you picked up on. And it was, on one hand was my inner child, which is this innocent, playful, loving, curious little creature that just wants to go out and play in the world with the girls and boys, which is like a lovely, sweet thing. And but there is that kind of fragility to it. And when that kid gets hurt, this judge comes along and it wants to protect that. It wants to shield that from hurt and rejection and abandonment and suffering and all the other useful things that the inner judge does. But it just drowns it out with just this hot-headed passion and anger and withdrawal. And the judge just pushes you away from whatever the stimulus is that has a potential to hurt me. And its logical conclusion is to just go away from everything and everyone because they are bad. And it assigns lots of negative labels for them. And then behind all this is some other part just feeling like, oh God, this is very overpowering. And also I shouldn't feel like this. I shouldn't be run by my judge. I shouldn't be labeling people like this. And there's this whole spiral and swirling mess of thoughts. And sometimes it's just enough to just lie there and just be with it and go, wow, there's a lot of heat, there's a lot of anger, there's a lot of something in here. And I just need to be on my own and regulate. Or sometimes if there's a very understanding, very patient person who's willing to go into the darker end of the spectrum to sit with and just say, I'm going through this right now, and it's really freaking me out. That's the kind of last line of last resort. So I think I was just outlining my reservations about going into the reparenting of this force right now. But
what does that? There's a couple of questions. What's your concept of reparenting? Would be the first one. But then the second one, there's a bunch of threads in there that I was wanting to look at, and kind of anger and judgment, because that's a hot topic, no pun intended. But it's it is, for me, I'm really interested in that because I have such a kind of an aversion, I think, to judgment when it comes across. It's I feel like I'm quite hard line about that, ironically, probably judgmental of judgment, but
yes.
Is it external facing? It sounded like when you were describing it was like an external facing, you've got this curious child and the judge then is kind of pushing away to the outside. And there's this great expression that I can't remember where I heard it. I don't think I made it up, but sometimes I do say interesting and useful things. But it's like judgment is the shortest distance between 2 points. And it's that left brain, left hemisphere, right, wrong, good, bad, very black and white, very binary perspective that is symptomatic of a kind of a dysregulated nervous system, or maybe not dysregulated, but you're in fight and flight mode at the very least, and it's like survival threat detection systems going off, and it's I need to know what's good, what's bad, right, wrong. It's very, very unnuanced, and so in some ways detached from reality, because it's just about what's the minimum amount of information I need to survive this situation. So judgment for me is very much linked to being in survival mode. And I'm really interested to get into that. But when you were talking about the wanting to protect this little child, it sounds like it's more kind of external facing, I'm going to protect this child from threat, which sounds like relatively healthy. But it's when that turns in on you, and it's this feeling is coming up, and this feeling is registering as a threat. So whatever this is, this feeling is what I'm experiencing physiologically and in the realm of sensations is registering as a threat. And so I'm going to turn that protective mechanism of the judge in on myself, which is, less than useful sometimes.
This came up in session recently with a client I was coaching, and yeah, that happens.
Mm.
It's an outward. It begins outward when the
Yeah,
stress is lower, but the stress is there. The stress activates and brings on the judge for me.
yeah, yeah,
Um, and the judge then, yeah, concentrates his efforts on that. And the logical conclusion next is the distance and the withdrawal. And then, yeah,
yeah.
where does that anger go? Where does it get directed? Then it comes in with, which is that experience I was saying about judging oneself for being judgmental. Like the
Mm.
judge doesn't know where to go. So then it goes inwards on that. So, yes. And there was a question you asked about what reparenting is to me. And it ties into that as well. Like, um, yeah, to reparent would be to correct or discipline or gently nurture a different behaviors in
Yeah.
something or someone. But of course, and this might be more Enneagram stuff. So the Enneagram one perfectionist, which is more the kind of the type that I see the world through. The there's such a high level of expectation and standards, and this may be related to the judge, I'm not sure, but there's this assumption that um, these standards should be so self-evident, and everyone should have these such high expectations that there isn't any room to begin with getting it wrong first and then working
Mm.
towards a better version. It's just like, well, you should know this, you should behave this way anyway. Like the judge just expects such high standards that when it comes to reparenting this part,
Mm.
um, it should already have this stuff from day one. That's the conceit of perfectionism. And the
Yeah,
judge is
yeah.
like, these standards are self-evident, they're very high, you should expect and demand the best, and there is no margin for anything below that. So there is no room
Yeah.
for reparenting. There's no meeting someone, that's why it's really hard to do this under stress conditions, I would say.
But
Um,
this kind of I really like the word that stood out for me, and that was like conceit. And
mm,
it's self-evident that everybody should be like this, and that when I hear that, I have this sense of like, what's the threat of it not being like that? What's the meaning?
mm,
So everything below this self-evident standard that I've decided, and because it's all about me, obviously, that's why the world should conform to these.
mm,
This there's almost like a righteousness in it.
the
What's
judge is very righteous, yes.
Yeah, right. And it's like, what's the threat of things not? What's the kind of the uncomfortable sensation, the uncomfortable bodily sensation that you would experience if things are not, if they're subpar, if somebody else does that, or if you do that? Like, what's the fear of loss in there, or what's going to be lost, or what's the fear?
Well, yeah, I get, yeah, that when we talk about stories and stories and stuff, stories and narrative, I mean, through the lens of Enneagram One, which is the trick of the ego and the personality that I didn't choose, that happens to be the way I see the world, is that if you're broken, wrong, bad for being imperfect and not meeting those standards, like the fear would be seen to be broken and in some way imperfect and human. Like,
That
of
mean like
course,
a
this,
kind of a withdrawal of love? Then, if you're imperfect,
yeah, I guess it would be. Is it unlovableness? Um,
yeah,
Possibly comes into it.
shame.
Yeah, shame, the anger, that's all mixed in with it. Like, but I think that it would be the being discovered, being it's the core fear thing, and we all have our own different narrative around the core fear. But the core fear, I think, that sits at the heart of people like me is that you are bad and that you are wrong and evil and corrupt, and there's something inherently, like down to the atoms of your body, wrong and bad and different, and
Yeah, yeah,
so utterly, you know, it's a that's what this judge is protecting me from. It does not want me to discover and find evidence that is true. Yet all it does is it biases me if I'm under stress, and if this is getting the better of me. It all it does is seek out evidence for that to confirm it.
yeah, yeah,
This inner story that we all have of self-loathing, whatever it is, the particular one that I'm lucky enough to live with is this one of corruption and badness and wrongness and
Yeah.
that's what's at the heart of it. I mean,
It's interesting though, because it's like
mm,
the judge is protecting you from that, but it's protecting you from another judge that is judging you as that. And that's like, it's like I'm bad and wrong. That in itself is a judgment from some other judge. And like these two judges just want to get into a ring
yeah,
and like duke it out a bit.
yeah.
It's like he's not
It's
bad and wrong, he's good and right. And it's like, no, he isn't, he's bad and wrong. It's like, all right, we're kind of getting lost here.
yeah,
We're like it's multiple layers of threat
yeah,
detection, survival mode
yeah,
stuff. It's like, well, what's the
yeah,
if you like to be able to pull it back to the
yeah,
experience of, all right, I'm having a
yeah,
physiological experience here. There's things moving around, there's sensations, there's
mm,
like blood running through the veins,
mm,
hormones, electrical activity. There's like a physical experience that's underlying this narrative
mm,
that feels really uncomfortable, but in
yeah,
some way it feels uncomfortable because I'm filtering it through the lens of
mm,
discomfort. But then of course,
mm,
the threat detection system is supposed to
mm,
feel uncomfortable, because if
mm,
it didn't, then you wouldn't be motivated to run away from the tiger or whatever. You'd be like, well,
yeah,
it's probably fine. I'm all
yeah,
right. It's not that
yeah,
uncomfortable. It's kind of like the motivation of pain, but it's layered inwards. It's
mm,
layered and facing inwards. Um,
yeah.
yeah, but
That
to be able to sit with that, I feel like is important and powerful.
that's it, it is, and thank you for that reminder, and also thank you for noticing that you were drawing like a cycle with your hands, then noticing the infinite regression of this
Yeah,
conundrum that the inner judge creates, this infinite loop of just irreconcilable truths,
yeah,
and that creates the heat and the frustration that it cannot be reconciled in the head. It can't be squared because it's just this impossible regression of
yeah, yeah,
and of loathing. But and you're right that you've reminded me that I mean during really stressful episodes, like when I went through a relationship separation, um, where all this business is at play and I'm super dysregulated. One of the things that really helped me and that would have helped when I was in my recent kind of split between the judge and the child would have been to do some kind of noticing practice like the one you say, like, oh, I can feel the heat in my head, I can feel the pulse running through my body, and just noticing things in the body. Or what I used to do was I'd be on a walk and I'd be just going around noticing and almost like labeling, or rather receiving things like, oh, a leaf on a tree trunk, pavement,
orienting.
after on the yeah, orienting, that's it. Yeah, orientating myself in the surroundings just to get out of to break that, like the control alt delete on the program that has got
Yeah,
stuck
yeah, yeah,
in this round and round. Like it's so funny to have that mirrored back to me that yeah, the judge creates this impossible situations where you literally cannot win whichever way you do. You're damned if you do and you're damned if you
yeah,
don't. And you're hemmed into a corner. Yeah. And to break that is to do some kind of orienting noticing. So that's another helpful technique. So yeah, thanks for
yeah.
the reminder.
Yeah, and I think that gets easier when I think this can segue into some thoughts about what reality is. Yeah, we
Mm.
can get that deep.
You want to go there, do you? You go
Yeah,
there.
it's eleven
Let's
thirty
go there,
seven in.
people.
Like we're getting in, we're getting
Go
stuck in.
on.
Um,
Take.
but like what reality is and how we have to filter it through a narrative structure. Like we filter it through language and through words, and that like the words create a kind of a meaning matrix that helps direct us towards what's apparently what's valuable to us as human beings, like what's innately authentically for us to value, assuming that we've dug deep and uncovered our values, which for a lot of people they haven't really maybe had the capacity to get to that yet, because this
Mm.
work is obviously, I think we've both been doing it a while. It's quite difficult, isn't it? It's like
It's one of the challenges.
yeah. It's throwing stuff up every so often that's like, oh, right,
Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Um, but I mean, yeah, this idea of we're in this very like almost in the like the waves, the froth on top of the ocean, in terms of I'm living in this reality here, and it's very volatile because sometimes it's stormy and sometimes it's not. But like the actual experience of reality, and this is what Vipassana taught me many, many years ago, and has kept as I keep practicing these kind of body-based exercises. It's continuous reiteration of, you know, morality. It seems like morality, there's something, it's more up here, it's more kind of judgment based, whereas physical experience, like there isn't necessarily a hard and fast, this might be horrible for an Enneagram 1, but it's like there isn't like a hard and fast morality in that sense. You know, you've got drives and urges that will either kind of connect you or disconnect you from the collective status quo of like what's acceptable and unacceptable. A generalized feeling of, well, if I start killing people for fun, that's probably going to be the society's not really going to vibe with that all so much, and the chances are I'm going to get kicked out. And so there is that sense of like shame and guilt that might come up without assuming you know you're wired in the kind of the consensus way of like, yeah, that might come up because there is a protection that wants to stop me from being too unhinged. And then there's obviously contexts within our current reality where that would be celebrated. It's like if you're Ukrainian, your kind of objective is to kill as many Russians as you can, and that would be celebrated on one side. And you know, you have that kind of division going on. But in that sense, like morality, it seems very constructed, and what you have is a set of physiological experiences within the body that you either like or you don't like. And what can have some effect on that is how you perceive it, like the meaning that you give to it, like your kind of meaning matrix that it gets filtered through. And I find it interesting, especially getting into the sound world, that words in essence are really just like sounds. You know, we shape our tongue and mouth in certain ways and run air through our esophagus and create a kind of a reverberated, articulated sound. And we spin up a bunch of those, and they have a specific meaning, which is like dictates emotional flows and even hormonal flows in the body, which I just find super interesting, because it's like where you trace it right back, like pre-language for human beings. It's like it was just sense data. There wasn't this layer of a kind of a meaning matrix on top of it. But if it goes awry, or if it's, say, not calibrated to reality in the present moment, and it's just something that's been inherited and not been investigated, so you're still running kind of sound-based word programs from when you're 5 years old, then it can be very, very detrimental. But if you are starting to investigate that in earnest and use your sounds to kind of change that energy flow a bit more, the meaning that you can create even from say what could be termed adverse physical experiences can be great. It's like, I think we talked about this last night in the Soul Cafe thing, and it came up, the thing of Viktor Frankl, you know, his Man's Search for Meaning book, where he's talking about the meaning that he gave that experience was what helped him connect to some kind of unconscious thread that navigated him through this really perilous and treacherous terrain. It's almost like his subconscious was directed to look for and sense the things that didn't quite fit, like that bit right at the end where he says he was instructed to get on this train to go to, they were going to be sent back to the front line, but then he had to stay behind to look after this one patient, and then the train, it turned out, was being sent off somewhere else to be burned. But he didn't get on that train, and then somehow survived and just like worked his way through. And I think not quite where I'm going with this, but I do feel like that meaning matrix that we create out of these articulated sounds is very, very potent in shaping how we experience things physically. But in order to be able to investigate it properly, you have to be like willing to drop into a kind of a almost like a childlike place of curiosity about the physical experience. Maybe in the same way that children don't really seem to have internalized that judge because they're like pre-linguistic, so they're just interested in everything. It's like they'll pick up a piece of shit and just like play with it and squeeze it, and it's like what's this, you know? It's like there's a stage of development at which that doesn't have a kind of maybe a negative connotation. It's just sense data, and they're trying to absorb it and trying to make some sense of the world. And I think you have to in some ways kind of go back to that level of consciousness to be able to reinterpret things that maybe been hardened within your system and now kind of acting as a detrimental force to your life experience. That was quite a lot.
It's quite a lot, yeah. We went back the esophagus right through to
Yeah.
we had Eastern philosophy and wisdom in there.
It's World War II.
To World War II, yeah.
Squeezing shit between your fingers, yeah.
To squeezing shit between your fingers. That was a tour de force, Tom. You've clearly thought about this very deeply, and also, yeah, I admire your interest in linguistics and language and how that affects all this. I mean, what I was hearing and trying to connect it with was my understanding of how we experience the world and as you call it, reality, and how we relate and express ourselves. And I think when the judge gets the better of it, it just tricks us into believing that the world is just that the construct that we have in our mind, in our head, the meaning matrix. It tricks us into believing that that is the only truth, the objective truth of the way the world is out there. And when you talk about if we can go back to some sort of childlike innocence or some other way of experiencing reality that gives us reprieve, and then that made me think about the underused centers, so that the heart and the body, the physical experience of reality, and the appetites and the desires and the instincts and the attraction and really kind of base instinct stuff that is certainly pre-language as you describe it, and the heart, the emotional experience of and the innocence of and the nuance and the multiplicity of how we can experience two emotions at the same time, and the subtleties and the flow and the spectrum of the emotional experience, which the head just does not want to believe. It the head just thinks right, wrong, good, bad. It doesn't understand that you can simultaneously love something and hate it, be drawn to something and repelled in the way that the heart can hold that. So that was how I made sense of everything you expressed there.
Yeah, I like that a lot. The heart being able to hold what the head can't, because the head tends to be very binary in its conceptions, and it's like there's this presupposition in NLP that the map is not the territory, and it's, when you think about it for half a second, it's like, yeah, well, that's kind of obvious, right? So you've got Google Maps, which shows you where everything is, kind of, but it's still not the same as being in that place and walking around it and feeling it and experiencing.
Right. I've always wondered what that meant. I've heard that saying before, and it's one of those things someone drops in. And I know, coachy stuff, and you go, yeah, I know what map is not the territory means. But now I know. So thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, okay. But it's also that your map could be one of those Ordnance Survey maps from like 1975, and
right.
Like you haven't got the Google real-time data, and you haven't like explored what it means. It's like the word London doesn't describe at all what London is, and in the same way that the name Chris doesn't describe the experience of you that fluctuates from day to day and involves all of these trillion little tiny interactions and transactions that are going on. And it's like I think that's what it means. It's like as soon as you word something, it kind of dumbs it down, and then you forget about it, and you kind of take away its luminosity, because you like
Yeah.
you don't really think about it anymore, and it kind of dulls reality. And I think that's very much a function of what the brain needs to do in order to survive. But in order to thrive, you have to kind of come back to that. You have to scale that back a little bit and start to observe things with that sense, I think, of childlike wonder. And another thing that came up in that again was this idea of feelings as a threat, and my physical experience is my brain registering my physical experience as a threat. It's like if somebody is like cutting my leg off, then that's fairly justified that there's probably a threat going on here, and I should, aim to distance myself as much as possible from that general activity. But you say if it's like emotion, some feeling that's coming up, your feeling is not necessarily a threat. The feeling is just a feedback. It's like your body that is absorbing sense data from the environment and bringing something up. And to be able to, if your like threat detection system fires off when you start having a physical sensation, it like clamps down and says, this feeling is a threat. Like what you are right now as a physical experience is threatening, to me up here. Then it will cut you off from that sense data, and really it's more like being willing to open up to that sense data and let it, feel it, experience it without, going into that fight or flight judgment mode, and let yourself experience it and let it reveal to you what it's trying to tell you, like what's its message, what's its core understanding. And then you can start to decide, well, is this still relevant today? Does this still fit the facts, or is this part of me that kind of clocked that when these things look like they're happening when I was 5 years old, that means that the big people are going to stop loving me and I'm going to be ostracized? And it's like, well, is that still relevant today? But you have to kind of let that sense data in and be willing to feel it a bit. And the other thing was this, like the complexity of different feelings at different times. And I think you really have to be in the body and embodied to be able to allow that to happen, because I've noticed through various different practices that when you're in the mental state, it's always trying to pin down, like, what is it? What's the thing that is the thing, so that then I can put a box around it and relax, because now I know what the thing is. But it's a very crude tool. Like it's not reality based at all, because like the reality is, well, it's not just a thing, it's lots of things, and too many things to really understand. And it brings to mind this metaphor. I've been working a lot with like tree metaphors recently, and just thinking about
rich, right?
yeah. Yeah. I think there's such a, just you watch things in nature and you see how it works, and it starts to make a bit more sense. It's like, well, the root is growing one direction and the branch is growing in a different direction, and those two things are not at odds with each other. Although if you were looking at it from the mind, it would look like, well, which one is it? Is it the branch and the fruit at the top, or is it the root at the bottom? And it's like they're just expanding in different directions and in different kind of dimensions. One of them's underground, the other one's up here, and they have different functions and purposes, but they both exist at the same time, and they do relate to one another. And I think a lot of times we're so concerned with trying to pin down what's the right thing. Is it the top bit or the bottom bit or the bit at the side, or is it this bit? And it's like, well, it's all of them, but you have to be able to like dilate your vision and perspective a little bit to be able to let that sense data exist without needing to clamp down on, I need to know what it is, which means being able to regulate with uncertainty for a bit.
Can I have a quick comfort break, Tom? I'm absolutely desperate.
Yeah, sure. I'll put it on hold.
Okay, I'm back. Sorry, I really wanted you to finish your beautiful forest and tree metaphor. I did have some responses to what you said, actually. Are you recording still? Are you? We all right
Yeah,
to
yeah,
pick it
yeah,
up.
yeah. Go on.
Mhm. Uh,
Uh,
I can hear myself.
Yeah, I think that was something that happened with my microphone. I'm not sure.
Okay,
I'm
it's all right.
recording on. Is it good now?
Let me just talk and see. We're good now. Yeah. Um, yeah. When you were describing the experience of navigating reality by labeling things and categorizing things and simplifying,
Hmm.
and you were describing the way that part of our brains work in a very abstract way. But I also thought it was a really beautiful description of the experience of living with a very overly functional inner critic or judge. It does exactly that.
Yeah.
um, and it's unhelpful when it starts to do that with people, and
Hmm.
it doesn't see the nuance in people. It doesn't see that the same character trait that they have can be both beneficial and helpful, as well as infuriatingly and unhelpful. Like, it doesn't see that. It abstracts into really concrete labels. So it says there's that behavior is bad and wrong, and therefore this entire person is being this thing is bad and wrong or broken,
Yeah.
which is quite extreme and not very helpful when it comes to human beings who are walking contradictions, and beautiful ones at that. And all that nuance is lost, in the richness of existence is lost when the inner critic is leading the way with its very simplistic worldview, like you say,
Hmm.
its with its wonderful command of the language. But like you say, language does put boundaries and boxes around things, and it wants to know to evaluate the entirety of something so that it knows whether it's a threat or whether it's, welcome or warning and all this kind of stuff. And
Yeah.
that's a really, it can be quite a toxic way to um see the world when it gets the better of us, I think, the judge.
I think it's like an unreality. I guess that's what would
Mm.
be like toxic about it, is that its service is more about survival, but it's not reconciling its actions with like full reality. It's very
Mm.
Ian McGilchrist talks about this. He talks about the left brain, and how when you're in that survival mode, like things lateralize to the left hemisphere, and that is the judge essentially. It's like the right, wrong, righteous sense of morality, and when you suppress the left hemisphere in people's brains, it actually they lose the facility of that,
Mm.
the judge, and it's almost like there's a kind of a childlike experience of the world and curiosity and wonder. Whereas when you suppress the right hemisphere, it's more, it just kind of exacerbates that whole right,
Mm.
wrong, very binary, black and white, dumbed down version of reality. And so what I could kind of see, I mean, we're talking a lot about inner critics and judges and how it's a common experience, like a shared experience for people. And I think there's a lot of that that's to do. I don't know if they had conversations about this like historically, or if, I don't think it's a new phenomenon for sure, but there is certainly, it seems like there is a kind of an exacerbated disconnection from nature in some ways, or like the nature, like the human nature of being a human, and it is very much like distract from discomfort and all of that. And I think there is a sense of like that, the elevation of the stress response, that chronic fight and flight, living in stress mode, which does make that the kind of the go-to. It does make like kind of left hemisphere judgment stuff the go-to for lots of people, because it's the way, I think often the way that you speak and the way that the inner voice shows up is symptomatic of the state of the nervous system a lot of times. And I'll talk about this. It's like if you're with clients, it's like if you're making very hard sounds with your internal voice, that it's like your nervous system is making sounds. Like we're coming back to what we talked about at the beginning. It wants attention. It's trying to convey some kind of message, but that's just materializing in a narrative structure rather that unfortunately might not be very well understood, because you're kind of coming at it from that narrative structure place. I think it can be useful to do that as long as you have tools like NVC to engage it in something that's going to bring it back down to a feelings and needs level. But yeah, for sure, for a lot of people, it's just that their experience, I think, tends to be, well, it's talking to me in this way, and the words that it's saying are real because it's happening inside of me, rather than, well, I don't know if they are real. I think it's just like there's a lot of stuff going on in the body that actually wants to be sat with and addressed, and then we can start to understand what's real based on the physical experience of it, rather than just the narrative.
Yeah, just a few reactions to that. The historical context of whether people had discussions about judges and critics in the past, there's a point. Well, I don't think they did, because they were all too busy being dictators or murderous, villainous ideologues, and
they're living it out, living out.
It out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, they were too busy being strong men and with very simplistic views of the world about this is right, this is wrong, this is good, this is bad.
Yeah.
That's traditionally where people with super overactive judges, that's where they spend their time, I think. Yeah, goodness, there's many places we could go with it. My mind's just gone blank. I'm just thinking about what a relief it is to not for my inner judge not to have won and force me down that path of being a dictator or some sort of a religious zealot, as Enneagram ones always end up being, but holders of the one truth, and they tend to be the heads of religious movements and things because they think they've got some special insight into the one right way, and they can see the world in this very binary, polarized way, which, and you're right to talk about stress in the nervous system, and it activates it when we're in times of great uncertainty, like at the moment. This is when the inner judges start to run the show in these people, because they come along with quick answers and simple solutions and labels and categories for this and that. And yeah, that it can explain quite a lot. We're all very stressed, and there's a lot, it seems like there's more uncertainty than ever. So the brain goes into the mode that you're describing and lead to some really bad stuff. But there was something I felt, I noticed this urge to, we're really beating down on the inner judge, and this kind of the tricks the brain plays on us, and I felt like it would be interesting. What's happening now is my judge is probably signaling that it wants to show like there are some virtues to this way, to its sure, there's the whole threat and safety thing, but there's also like when this judge, this facility of being able to evaluate something and abstract a conclusion or a judgment about it, the good side, the good the useful, helpful side of this, when it's not running the show, is it, at least for me, my experience is, it's this wonderful, subtle indication of what feels right and appropriate, and for me in the moment, like discerning the quality of something without labeling it. It's almost like a halfway judgment. It's like, for example, I've heard it described as, when you meet someone and you're with them, there's a kind of non-verbal, non-intellectual experience of feeling some kind of affinity, like a vibe check, people described it. The judge is super good at that. Like, I can walk into a room and know, for example, who's just had a fallout, or and then obviously it can help relationally if I can, or it's the same part of me. We're both very practical, join a DIY type. I'm talking about myself, the DIY. I know you do it professionally, but we can walk into a room and know where the lines are slightly off and where something could be
Yeah.
improved or built more
Yeah. I can't
helpfully or
unsee that stuff
functionally.
now.
Yeah. We
It's
can't
like,
unsee it. Yeah.
no, now I've got that kind of technical prowess, or at least some
Yeah.
degree of it. We walk into a room and
Yeah.
you're like, oh, it's just ruined
Mm.
like room for me now because I just see where things are off, where things haven't been done right.
Yeah, that's it. It's off. That sense of something being off or something being
Yeah.
on is a really beautiful gift of the judge when it's serving us. This.
Mm.
We were both in a soul cafe about discernment, and it really helped me appreciate the gift of the judge in discerning what is true or right or real or on,
Mm.
and conversely what isn't. And that's a really useful, like almost like a compass for guiding me in the
Yeah.
right direction towards what would be fulfilling and right for me. So yeah, that the judge wanted to pop up and let everyone know at home that it's not
Don't get
all
rid of me.
yeah, it's not all genocide and fascism and
Oh, I love that though, because I think, you know, there's a tendency to want to beat down on one side, which is kind of like the covert judge, the anti-judge,
mm,
which is saying,
yes.
hey, judge, the judge is bullshit. But I do think it's right. It's like it's not there for no reason. It's just, and I like this idea of, you know, there's the middle, and then there's things that move in different directions from the middle, and
Yeah.
wherever the vibe is, it's like there's always something that's going to bring you back to the middle, but it can be opposite things. I think this shows up. I remember hearing an example of it with Ayurveda medicine once, and it's like this guy had a headache, and his
Mm.
Ayurveda doctor said, "Oh, you need to eat some onion rings." It's like what? But
Oh.
there's always something that's going to kind of bring you back to
Mm.
the middle, and it
Mm.
might look like different things at different
Mm.
times. It's quite difficult to wrap your head around because
Mm.
the brain wants to often go, well, it's this or it's this, and
Mm.
once it's that, then I can set that and forget it. But it's
Mm.
not that at all, because it's like sometimes you're tired and sometimes you need to get up and move around, and sometimes
Mm.
you're hungry and then sometimes you're not hungry, and there's always something that's going to satiate where you are, but that's a very fluid process. And so I think, yeah, to hark that back around to the idea of the utility of the judge and how useful it can be. The flavor of this podcast was more, I think, for people who experience like the overbearing nature of it. It's like
Mm.
it's so consuming that
Yeah.
what they need is like a counterweight to help them balance out that thing. But then if you go to the other side completely, and you've got no judgment about anything, it's like, well, why don't I just fucking go wild? You know, why not?
Yeah, it's a juicy question, isn't it? Think of all those
Yeah,
people out there who don't have an inner critic or an inner judge, and
yeah,
where that can lead to in life. That
yeah,
non-sense of self-observation and awareness that helps inform the choices we make in life about where
yeah.
and what, you know.
Well, it is kind of like if the world, you know, you are coming back to almost like a kid, like a childlike place, which is
Mm.
important on some level, but you wouldn't want the world to be run by kids necessarily, because it would be quite chaotic, and there isn't like the organizational capacity across time. Kids haven't quite developed that resource yet, and so I think, I mean, it would just be chaos, wouldn't it? And it's like, well, we can do this and we can do that, and like you see kids in the playground, and they're not. They can be real little assholes, you know, and like
Uh,
ostracize people and bully people, and it's like
yeah.
it's just good fun. Like there's no, and
Mm.
not for the people that are on the other end of it, but there is a necessity to develop that capacity for, I guess, a sense of okayness and not okayness,
Mm.
in order to be able to live with other people in society. But it's when that becomes too overbearing and it's not based on calibrated facts that are
Mm.
relevant to
Mm.
like today's reality, and they're still kind of living
Mm.
maybe from stuff that happened when they were a few years old.
Mm.
It's trauma
Uh,
informed, I think.
yeah. I'm still hung up on this idea of where you held your hand in a sort of pointed fist, and you said there's this idea of a center, which felt
Yeah,
like regulation or homeostasis or being, yeah, grounded and centered and present with
yeah.
yourself. And,
Higher
you
the
know,
storm.
yeah, the either some that you're, an operational, optimized human being, and then we move around that in different ways, towards the judge or towards the kind of helpful
Mm.
discernment side of things. And when you drop the onion ring story, the Ayurvedic onion ring, that made me think about, yeah, that's another way the judge pops up, the discerning judge for me. It's like it does sound really trivial, but sometimes maybe people listening will relate. Sometimes you just have a craving, there's this food or there's this
Yeah,
something
yeah.
that you want to experience, a texture or flavor or spice or whatever it is, and you get that thing, and that returns you back. You kind of go out regulation because there's a desire for something, and that could be this taste, or it could be the world being in the wrong way. It needs correcting to be in a different way, and we go out and we do that, and we affect the change or whatever it is, that need that has to be met, and then that returns us back to the center. And that's I'm fascinated by that, this idea that it isn't a binary spectrum that's linear and horizontal. Like, we just move around this space, and maybe the
Yeah.
judges or the critic or what we call this force returns us back to our middle. And I really like that.
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm just thinking about that as you're describing it as well. It's like the Buddhists talk about that wheel, don't they? The wheel of Dharma, and how it's like, yeah, there is that keeps on turning. Just really run with this metaphor now. Like that always keeps turning. So it's also not that you need to always stay in the middle. It's like the goal is to maybe not necessarily stay in the middle, but to feel where, I guess it's more stable in the middle. Let me see if I can pull this around. It's like, in order to have your internal state in the middle, um, almost feels like to be without judgment. But in order to live in the world, there will be times where, the wheel's over here, and you need to kind of bring it back more into balance, but then the wheel's turning as well at the same time. So it's like this continuous thing that's going on where, what was up before is now down because the wheel's like turned the full way, and what was down is now up. So if you were kind of wanting to go up, you'd have to go kind of the opposite way now because things are different. Does that make sense? So I'm kind of
The
spinning
wheels
it out.
confuse things for me, Tom. I'm gonna say I wanted to nod along there and pretend like I knew what the Buddhist wheel was, but no,
Yeah.
I think I know what you're getting at. Yeah, there's this idea of perpetual motion, maybe. I don't
Yeah,
know.
it's like it's
Go
through
on.
time. It's like you've got the
Yeah.
space dimension, which is the wheel. It's like over here or over here,
Mm.
but then you've got the thing through time, which is like it's turning and turning. So what you need to do in the morning is different to what you need to do in the evening because, well, the
Mm.
world's literally upside down now, isn't
Oh, wow. Yeah.
it?
Yeah. I'm gonna stick with the pointed fist and the onion rings, if I'm honest, Tom. Is that all right?
Yeah, that's fine. But yeah,
Yeah.
we'll just keep it static. We'll keep it space based. Yeah.
Yeah. How are we doing with our question that we kind of that I asked for at the start? That the
Yeah, that was
what
we
is
were
it
talking
like,
about
or how
before
to?
we started recording. It was like
Yeah.
what we were trying to do was think of a question that we would try to answer in this little pod, and I guess I don't know if we've answered it, but maybe we've arrived at a place where we have a question that people could take away that might be useful for them. Maybe that's better than having an answer. Is like we've come to
Mm,
the end of the podcast and arrived at a really good
mm,
question that people can take away and like sit with and be like, huh, what is that like? Or
yeah.
something along those lines.
Mm.
Yeah. Any
You're
thought?
looking at me like, have I got that question?
That's it. I'm just expecting you to pull it out of the
Yeah,
hat
to
now.
drop in. I don't know,
Yeah,
I like it's often the way, isn't it? I find myself doing this on my own podcast, which I might plug actually. It's called Beyond the Basement, and
yeah.
I take problems for walks and discuss things like the inner critic and inner judge, and what it's like for me living with that, and what works and what helps, or that kind of thing. So yeah, have a listen. But it feels like often like one of the kind of truths that I keep coming back to, or well, truths. I've fallen for that trick again. One of the bits of insight or wisdom I keep saying is this kind of, I don't know about you, but I don't choose my thoughts and feelings. They
Mm,
kind of drift in and drift out, for me the living with the judge and the critic is fundamentally the experience of these very seemingly but very believable, very overpowering, very compelling truths and thoughts and feelings that seem to be me. And all these practices that I do, like the parts work and the body work and whatever you can do, they're all just trying to do the same thing, which is just to disidentify with the judge. Like, I'm not the judge,
yeah,
I'm not the thoughts and feelings that it prompts in me, I'm not these sensations, no matter how compelling and overpowering this seems to be. I'm not I'm not it. I'm not these thoughts, feelings. They're just the
yeah,
story that triggers. It's dealing with a situation that happened when I was a kid that may not be relevant anymore, all that business. But just to disentangle me, like in parts where we talk about, and you've alluded to it actually several times, decided it behind all the noise and interference is this kind of essential self, like an authentic,
yeah,
true spiritual soul, love, God, whatever you want to call it, like being that is me sat behind it and can watch this shit show as it unfolds and just observe it for what it is and not identify too much. And that's the work for me. And it's easier said than done when you're sat in a tent and you're flipping out because your judge is making your head melt. I'm a long way off that, but that so, mate, what's the question in that, Tom? Did you hear a really insightful, enlightening question in any of that?
I guess like
Not
who
not
am,
nice,
who
is
am
it?
I? Yeah, who am I?
Who am I? Yeah. Are you really your thoughts and feelings? Is it really true?
Yeah, is this
That's
me?
the is this
Is this me,
yeah,
or is this
yeah.
part of me that I've kind of? Is this a
Mm.
part of me that has such a kind of a density that its gravitational pull is so fierce that I just get sucked into orbiting it
Mm.
around and around. I can't take my eyes off it because it's
Mm.
it's so. And I often feel like that. It could be metaphorical, but it almost feels literal. It's like density in terms of
Mm.
matter and material creates a kind of a. I'm not a scientist here. Maybe Carlos will be able to help with this, but it's like there is like the more dense something is, it does have a stronger gravitational field. I think, right? You know what we learned from Interstellar
Yeah.
and that and how that distorts time perception.
Yep.
Um, but yeah, am I like sucked into the gravitational field of a part of me
Mm.
that I'm so like, identified with, and can I like dilate my perspective, body perception a little bit, and start to re-identify with the water that flows through all of these different parts, or the space that all of these like planets are mucking
Mm.
around in.
Mm. That's lovely. Yeah, that works for me. That one. Yeah, the black hole or the
Yeah,
critical mass, the dark matter, just the intense gravity that pulls you in. And for those
yeah,
of us who have very vocal inner critics and judges, that's what it feels like. It's one of the loudest parts, and it
yeah,
just
yeah,
it dwarfs all the other bits, the inner child, the flirt, all the other archetypes and
yeah,
parts within us. It absolutely you know, when we're stressed and uncertainty abounds, man, that hole just opens up and, like you say, sucks everything towards it. Yeah.
yeah. I reckon. So maybe that's a good place to kind of wrap it up then, because I think the is this me is a pretty reasonable question to ask when when that gravity starts to kind of pull you in and you're looping around. It's like, is
Yeah.
this what have I forgotten? That's very sounds very
Mm.
Alan Watts. What have you forgotten?
Mm, mm. And if you can answer that in like what 150 words by next episode,
150 words is going to be difficult for me.
yeah,
I have quite a big
yeah.
mouth.
Just wow. Enneagram's been dropped in here a few times.
Yeah,
Actually,
yeah,
there's a really good invitation from the Enneagram which reveals these personality types and biases and lenses through which you view the world. And someone framed the Enneagram to me not a case of who are you, is who aren't you. Like if you're
ah,
useful,
okay.
yeah, right, okay. So if one looks at Enneagram one and can see all these patterns and can see the judge for what it is, you can go, oh, I'm not that. That just happens to be something that colors the way I relate to reality. So like, who am I not? Is sometimes also a good
Yeah.
question, but it's might be a bit
Who am I?
ephemeral.
So if the inner critic comes in and it starts mouthing off, it's like, who am I not? I don't. What would? How would that? What would the answer to that be?
I've
I
not
guess
made
it's
this.
like,
I've complicated everything at the 11th hour, haven't I? I've got it wrong. My judge is flipping out now. Go on.
well, I'm thinking of like, maybe I'm not the helpless child anymore. Maybe that's who I'm not.
Ooh,
No.
yeah, yeah,
Who am I
yeah. I'm
not?
not
I'm
the.
not the helpless child that's being bullied by this thing.
Yes,
Mm.
yes. And I'm not. I'm not the judge. I'm not. I'm not. I'm not the one. Yeah, judging people and things. Yeah, I'm not that. I'm not the child. I'm not all the other parts that might run us. Yeah. Um. Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and that comes back to the disidentification, doesn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Mm,
Nice.
mm. There was
Yeah.
something more profound I wanted to add, but I've discovered, and this might be a body thing, but like 90 minutes, something switches at 90 minutes, and it's just
Yeah.
like the intellectual experience of what I'm going through just goes, it shuts off and it goes like we need to move or do something physical.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
odd. I've noticed it, and I think I've just got to that point when I start going circular or brain freeze.
Yeah. 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 90 minutes is one ultradian cycle. So in like sleep,
Yeah.
uh, sleep is, you have like REM periods in sleep. You have generally a good night's sleep is three ultradian cycles, 90 minutes, 90 minutes.
Okay.
And then like kind of deep sleep and then less deep sleep, less
Mm.
sleep.
All
Um,
right. You're a real repository for like it's not just like Henry's cat superficial look at the facts. Like there's a depth to all the little bits of information you've collated, and then yeah, and you have a real gift for weaving those in, and also your metaphors as well. They're also kind of like drawing on traditions and things in a way I've not really experienced with such
yeah,
breadth before. I'm giving you a compliment here. This is as good as it gets with Enneagram one.
I'm receiving it. No, I feel lucky
Okay.
to be. Feel lucky to be a recipient of it.
Yeah.
It's like nearly perfection. It feels like
Yeah. Almost. I'm working on that. I'll
next
definitely
time.
achieve
Yeah,
it one day.
yeah. No, it's good. I mean, I think I spend a lot of time sitting and doing nothing and just breathing, and that kind of helps things move along. But I find I just get a real kick out of having these kinds of conversations and thinking about things and
Mm,
like synthesizing information to come
mm,
up with new stuff.
mm.
I think we might have come up with some new stuff in that. I think we both put in and got something out. I don't know. I feel
I
like
think
that.
so. Yeah, yeah. I feel like it covered it got I felt satisfied in as much as we touched on lots of stuff about my experiences and yours, but
Yeah.
not in a way that it's just two guys wanting to say all the things they're excited about. It all related. We
Yeah.
did we comprehensively kind of surveyed the territory, if you know what I mean. That's why it
Yeah.
feels satisfying for me.
I feel very, very satiated. So,
Mm.
what I would like is for you to tell people where they can go and find your stuff. You mentioned Beyond the Basement, which I'd highly recommend. I like that podcast. It's very,
Thank you, Tom.
it's just very like, I love the spontaneity in it, and it feels like this is a real thing that's going on here, rather than this I'm reading off a script and I've got these bits of things to impart. I get a real good sense of listening to your podcast, and it kind of actually inspired me to get a bit back into this stuff, was listening to your stuff. So where else can we like get a bit of you?
Oh, thank you for the compliment. Yeah, it's I'm always touched when people listen to it. It's like, oh wow, that makes it real. And yeah, it's also very much a lesson in me not trying to overcome the urge for getting it right and perfect, and that does help quieten the inner critic that wants to get it just right. And yeah, just be more improv in life. That's I'm an improviser, and it's living my truth, and it's an act of experimentation and authenticity, I think. So I'm glad that's landing. Thank you. But yeah, so your question, where can they find me? I'm quite getting more active on Instagram at Chris Kenworthy. I'm starting to do a similar thing there, but with video. So it's a similar experience, little shorts that I just talk about what's kind of alive, and improv stuff and authentic relating. I hang out there. I'm on LinkedIn as well, at Chris Kenworthy. And I love emails from people. I love getting into discourse. So yeah, Chris at chriskenworthy.co.uk. Same with the web address, www.chriskenworthy.co.uk. Yeah, that's where I hang out.
Yeah, great. Well, thanks for engaging and embarking on this ultradian cycle with me. It's been good.
Yeah, thanks. It was a good time to pounce. I'm glad you did. I'm glad it happened.
Yeah.
You put your money where your mouth was. You kind of saw it and you pounced and you said, "This is interesting," and it's really life. I mean, that's they make for the best experiences where there's kind of a the stars align or whatever, and we're both kind of into this thing at the moment. And because it is, it comes in cycles. Like 2 months time, I might be like, yeah, I've still got the judge, but I'm not really engaged in working with it at the moment. But right now, I am, because it's given me it. I'm deepening my relationship with it, so it's been really helpful to vocalize some of what it's like being me, which is
Awesome. Well, I'm glad we did it. So thanks very much, Mr. Kenworthy, and yeah, see everyone later. Boom.